Today's episode is brought to you by Salesforce. Salesforce is the world's #1 AI CRM, helping businesses and governments of every size connect with the people they serve. From sales to service to citizen engagement and mission support, Salesforce Agentic AI works autonomously to power the world's most innovative companies, agencies, and institutions, keeping humans in the driver's seat. Learn more at salesforce.com/EU.
Good morning, it's Monday, June 29, and this is the Brussels Playbook podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is existential as the EU's diplomatic service fights to prove it still has a future. Also on the pod, Europe is talking tough on China, but Beijing is betting Brussels will blink. That's so many B's. It was all alliterative B's. Thanks for that one, Dionis. And Greece is putting a bounty on poisonous pufferfish taking over its waters. Nick.
I want to know more. Let's go right in.
Let's do it. I'm Zoya Sheftalovich, and with me today is Nick Vinocur, our Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. And Nick, our first story is actually exactly in your wheelhouse. In fact, you've written it. It's about why the EEAS is fighting for its future. So let's talk it out a bit. Can you tell us a little bit about this EU diplomatic service? This is the European External Action Service. It's led by EU High Representative Kaja Kallas. What is it meant to do and what's going on?
Yeah, so this all came about when the last big wave of treaties, the Treaty of Lisbon in 2008. And the thought was that instead of having 27, 28 at the time, different sort of foreign policy voices, you would have the EU foreign policy voice. And there would be an HRVP. They signed that into the treaty. And then after a few years later, they decided to create the EEAS, a standalone diplomatic service, which would be staffed with national diplomats, but also EU staff. And over time, this thing has grown and grown and grown. Now it's got about 5,000 people working there in delegations all around the world. And the idea is to come up with joint positions that are going to represent the EU's view on the world stage. I've just done air quotes there. Perfect for podcasts.
The best medium for air quotes.
And also to do diplomacy, basically to help countries do diplomacy, especially for smaller countries that don't have a vast diplomatic network.
Except, Nick, that was the idea, right? But what we've ended up with is kind of a Frankenstein's monster situation where we have both the EEAS and still nations with their own representatives in a lot of these places. There's a lot of fighting for territory where you've got Brussels kind of divided the positions when it comes to EU foreign policy between the European Commission, with Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission president, really strong on foreign policy, trying to eke out space there, but also this kind of extra branch.
Exactly. So I think what this story's about is really how the world has changed since 2011 when this thing came to be. Traditional diplomacy statements were more important at the time. Now we live in a world of much more brutal power politics. What the story talks about is how the Commission has grown more powerful. It has the policy tools. It has the trade tools. It handles migration, super important issue in the EU, and it has vast resources. It controls the EU budget. So over time, it's taken on a bigger role. Von der Leyen herself enjoys external relations with other leaders. She is now a stateswoman figure on the world stage. And that's created a kind of structural tension between the Commission and the EEAS, and of course its leaders. And there's a big personal part of that, which I think we'll get into. But the structure is really what we talk about in this story.
And there have been a few instances recently where we can see this writ large. There was the fact that when it comes to talks, high-level talks about Ukraine with Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen's Chief of Staff, Bjorn Seibert, has been involved in those. The Commission has been hosting Taliban officials to discuss migration just last week. The Israel policy is a big mess. Kaja Kallas has upset the Israelis with some of the things that she has said. She allegedly kind of likened them to an apartheid state. As a result of that, the Israelis aren't keen to talk to her. So the Commission has sent in Dubravka Šuica, who is the commissioner in charge of the Mediterranean. So it's just all of this overlapping stuff that's happening, which creates a bit of a mess, because if you're the EEAS and you're trying to be the one voice of EU diplomatic policy and you see the Commission taking more and more bites at your cherry, you might call that a power grab.
You might call it a power grab. A lot of people are calling it that. I think the Suiza situation you just described is the perfect encapsulation of the situation, because on a day when Kallas was in the Middle East, has broken off relations with Israel, is in this kind of spat with the foreign minister, you had a senior commissioner appearing in a press conference with that same minister who says he won't speak to the EU's chief diplomat. So from the outside, effectively what you're seeing is a split personality, right? We created the EEAS to speak with one voice on behalf of the EU. And on that day, there were effectively two voices. So the optics of that, and both sides will tell you these trips were long scheduled. This is not a conflict. But the fact of the matter is you have a commission which is conducting Israel policy along one track, and then you have a diplomatic relationship with the EEAS, which is evolving on another track, and it creates a bit of confusion, of course.
Well, let's talk about the personal tension you alluded to. It's no secret that there has been tension between the Kallas and VDL camps.
Absolutely. We're talking about two very high-profile politicians here. Kallas was the Estonian prime minister before coming into this job. She has experience with executive leadership, and a lot of that role is dealing with EU ambassadors here in Brussels, managing a lot of the process. Some of it is quite boring. And when she first came into this job, a lot of the grumbling in town was, well, she's going over our heads as ambassadors. And that created a bit of resentment. And then you have this tension with von der Leyen herself, who's taken on some of these diplomatic roles. And this has led to, well, in some cases, the Commission's spokesperson staff has corrected or distanced itself from comments that Kallas made. She said in an interview she likened China's overcapacity, its effect on EU industry, to a cancer. Now, the Commission did not take on board that comment and said, well, that doesn't represent the EU position. So you have that tension there.
The other thing there's tension about is staffing, right? Because Ursula von der Leyen has been able to attract some of the top staff from the EEAS as well. And there have been some accusations flying around of basically a brain drain in the direction of the Commission, right?
Absolutely. So you had some high-profile departures. One was Simon Mordew. He used to have a very senior role inside the EEAS. He was taken on as diplomatic advisor to von der Leyen at the start of her term. Now, she's been fighting back, and she unveiled some high-profile new hires this week, a new leadership structure inside the EEAS. She named a former...
This is Kallas, right?
Kallas, absolutely. She announced a new Secretary General, which is the former Dutch Defense Minister, Kaja Kallas. So a high-profile person there.
Yeah, she's very well known in town and also obviously in the capitals.
Having a former defense minister who also knows the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, very well, is a bit of a power move. Also, David Schwach, and I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, France's former ambassador to NATO. He's Deputy Secretary General for Peace and Security, another kind of symbol of we want to really lay in that defense part.
Yes, there are a number of appointments that she's making which are quite high profile and designed to kind of wrestle back some of that power. In any case, Nick, this is just one of several stories that you've been working on for several months, and they're going to be on our website over this week. So folks should keep an eye on our website for all that.
Absolutely. Stay tuned.
Nick, on to our second story. China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao is in town today in Brussels. He's going to be in talks with the EU's Trade Commissioner, Sheftalovich. And it's the first major EU-China trade meeting since this European Council summit that you and I were both at, where basically the EU decided they were going to get tougher on China.
What's going on here? The EU is getting ready to protect its markets much more aggressively. But on the other hand, it wants to keep this dialogue channel open with Beijing. The basic ask is, please stop flooding Europe with goods that its own economy can't absorb. This is the overcapacity, pushing Beijing to develop its domestic market, sell more of this stuff at home rather than export so much. But also they want to fend off a full-blown trade war. And they're also saying, look, we've been talking for a while, but something kind of needs to change. Now, our colleague Carlo has a piece out this morning that talks about just how far out of whack this relationship has become.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. And I mean, we've been talking on this podcast about this for a while as well. So China's trade surplus with the EU reached 360 billion euro in 2025. And this year it's already on track to be 10% higher than that. And China's now making 1/3 of all manufactured goods in the world.
Sounds like a big proportion, big amount.
Yeah, not too shabby. And Nick, I've been in talks with Commission officials, with EU diplomats. They're all on the same page. They're saying, we now get it. Every country in the EU now has a trade deficit with China. So they agree that the problem is huge. The problem is when you start talking about what the solution might be and taking out the various instruments that the Commission has at its disposal, you've got countries like Germany that are saying, whoa, I don't know if we want to go so hard and use the anti-coercion instrument, which was this trade bazooka that was created specifically to use against China by the Commission.
Yeah, and Germany is, as always, the key player when it comes to these trade discussions with China. Very cautious about picking a fight, about taking a hawkish line, largely because the German car makers, even though their market share in China has been diminishing, and of course they're affected by Chinese exports into Europe, they continue to make a lot of money in China, and they've defended that market share. So they have been kind of cautious. And as you mentioned, the anti-coercion instrument, Germany's always kind of said, no, we don't want to do that. But what they've asked the Commission to do is to come up with a smaller gun, right? Different tools that are kind of more targeted, more precise to help address these imbalances. And that's really a buzzword, imbalances, that has come about in the past few weeks. We don't say overcapacity. We don't say China. We say imbalances.
The funny thing is, Nick, that I've been in briefings with officials who say, okay, this is from the Commission's perspective, we can make more instruments, but unless you're willing to use one of them, this isn't particularly helpful. And they're warning that actually, if you keep putting a bunch of guns on the table, but you make it clear to China that you're not going to pull the trigger, then China's just going to think, oh, well, this is just another BS kind of thing that you're not going to do. And in Carlo's story, you get a sense of that, where there's this feeling of okay, Beijing just expects Brussels to blink.
And that's kind of the bottom line here, is that Beijing has hit back at any measure that the EU has done.
Without blinking.
Without blinking, indeed. And Xi Jinping continues to put manufacturing at the heart of the Chinese economy. This is kind of his bet on China. So there isn't a great deal of give from that side. It's hard to see how dialogue can kind of fix this unless something really changes.
Before we get to our final story, Nick, first, I just wanted to give our audience a quick recommendation. Our colleague Dasha Burns in the US, she's my counterpart in DC, she's interviewed Finnish President Alexander Stubb for our US sister podcast, The Conversation. And they talk about Trump, Ukraine, the future of NATO. And Stubb actually told her that Europe has heard Washington's demand to take more responsibility for its own security. And he's got some advice for anyone panicking about the transatlantic alliance.
I'm sorry, I love this. As a Swede, I say, very Finnish. Go on.
Be a Finn. Take a sauna. Take a cold bath. Calm down. We'll sort this out.
You can listen to the full interview on The Conversation, and the link to that podcast is in the show notes. Nick, what do you know about poisonous pufferfish?
I would say my ignorance is bliss on that one.
I can tell you're not a classic Simpsons fan, because everything I know about the pufferfish comes from that episode of The Simpsons from 1994 where Homer decides to eat a poisonous pufferfish sushi. Anyway, look, I was just reading about this. They're 40 to 60 centimeters long. They have jaws that can bite through fishing nets and bones.
Whoa.
Yeah, and their flesh contains poison with no known antidote.
Yikes.
And they're actually invading the waters around Greece. Sorry for our Greek friends of the pod. They're originally in the Red Sea, but they've reached the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal, Nick.
I hope they paid the toll, though. Sorry, it's a terrible joke, but...
Well, apparently climate change is helping them survive in the waters where they previously were not. And because they've got no natural enemy in the Med, they're just eating all of everyone's catches, biting through fishermen's nets. It's pretty bad.
Wreaking havoc. Is there a pufferfish jaws potential here?
One can only dream. Our colleague Nectarius Stamuli has actually written a story that's also out this morning talking about how the government is trying to help out these Greek fishermen, and the cost per boat for the damage that they wreak is 8,500 euros each year. So they're really kind of motivated to help out those fisher people. Yeah. And Greece is now offering to pay them €5.33 per kilo of pufferfish that are caught and destroyed.
Yeah, and of course we're making jokes, but this is a matter of their livelihood for these fishermen who are losing out on a lot of their catch. So it is a super serious issue.
Yeah, although I was pleased to read through this story and find out that it's okay to keep swimming in the Med, because it turns out it's not really so much of a problem to be near a pufferfish. You just don't want to lick it.
Okay, so ixnay on the Jaws sequel.
That's about it from us today, folks. Although let's celebrate the birthday of someone who's no longer with us. We don't normally do this, but it is a bit special. It's Robert Schumann, who was born 140 years ago today.
Bobby Schumann.
Yeah, Bobby S. He of the roundabout.
What would he think of the roundabout that they unveiled? Is he rolling over?
Let's ask him. Get the Ouija board out. That's about it from us today. Tell us, we've been talking about the pufferfish in the Med. Tell us about your holiday destinations this summer.
Where are you going?
That's what I'd like to know. I literally don't have plans, Nick. So if someone can suggest a place that's not too hot in August.
Yeah, cool occasions.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah. Somewhere with a breeze and a mojito.
Let's do it.
Yeah. That's it from us, folks. Rate us, review us. Speak to you tomorrow.
A message from Salesforce. Across Europe, Salesforce is investing in the future of trusted AI, helping businesses and public sector organizations connect with customers and citizens in new ways. As the world's #1 AI CRM, Salesforce powers companies to become agentic enterprises, a new model of work where humans and trusted AI agents drive success together. Learn more at salesforce.com/EU.